In just a few weeks, Supergirl, open bracket 2026, closed bracket, will arrive in theaters as the next installment in James Gunn and Peter Safran's revamped DCU. I've been a fan of Supergirl for most of my life and have often called her my favorite character in fiction, full stop, even going so far as to make several videos about her back during my previous life on this website. When you like a character that much for so long, it can be easy to get very precious about them and how they're presented, especially at times like now when so many are coming to know her for the first time and every new piece of footage we get from a trailer or TV ad is subjected to more scrutiny than anything I've made in my entire life. I confess there is a part of me that's worried by it, that wonders if people will really see the character the way I do once the movie is out, if they'll actually go back and explore her past and present adventures in the comics and other mediums as I have, and if I myself am being too much of a fanboy when I make my own observations about all the marketing and merch the movie is getting, or how embarrassed I am every time I see a chud say something disparaging about the actress playing her, while I simply try and wait to see how she actually does in the finished film, and she very impressively shrugs it off online and in interviews. All of these are pitfalls and rabbit holes I find myself more and more wary of as the release date gets closer, but one of the ways I've been dealing with that is by trying to put myself back into the shoes of a new fan, by revisiting a lot of versions of Supergirl's story that made me a fan of her in the first place. So, would you like to join me to discuss one such version? I first discovered Supergirl when I was actually about the same age she usually is for her origin, mid to late teens. At the time, my family was getting by, but didn't have a ton of extra money, so a lot of my entertainment came from things I could borrow from the library or find on YouTube in the pre-Content ID days. And there was a time when a channel I was a fan of would often mention or reference the show Smallville, so wanting to be in on the joke, I started borrowing the DVDs, eventually getting to season 7, which heavily features its take on Supergirl. However, at the time I wasn't exactly thrilled by that take, and while I probably have plenty to say about it now, that's not what this video is about. No, I'll need more time and patience to rewatch that show someday first. However, I bring it up because what really got me interested in the character was a mini documentary they included with the season 7 DVDs that detailed the broad strokes of her history and showcased several different versions, prominently that of the DCAU, or Timverse as it's come to be called. For those unfamiliar, this is the interconnected universe of animated series from the turn of the century, headed up by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, that started with Batman the Animated Series and ended with Justice League Unlimited. And knowing that I could find lots of cartoon episodes uploaded in free parts on YouTube back in those days, that was the first version I sought out and really came to love. So that's the topic of this video. The Tim vs. Supergirl debuted in the two-part Season 2 finale of Superman the Animated Series, Little Girl Lost, which starts off with Superman investigating the part of the universe where Krypton used to be, only to find a distress signal from a neighboring world, which leads him to a cryo chamber wherein several denizens of the planet, which was destroyed by the aftershocks of Krypton's destruction, hid in order to hopefully survive long enough for someone to find them. Sadly, though, all but one of the cryopods was destroyed, the one remaining containing a young girl named Kara Inza. From there, the episode cuts several months ahead in time to show Kara living on the Kent farm with Ma and Pa acting as her guardians and Clark Kent only occasionally visiting. But Much like all young women in Western animation at the time, she wants more out of life than doing chores and going to school. So she follows Clark back to Metropolis, befriends Jimmy Olsen, and helps him pursue a story connecting Granny Goodness to Intergang, earning some respect from Superman and her own title as Supergirl in the process. It's a fairly simple origin, but it's in keeping of the style of that universe, and remarkably entertaining for so many years on. There is a part of me that, as an adult viewer, roughly double the age I would have been when I first saw it, wishes the episode had one or two more scenes devoted to showing Kara actually waking up from cryosleep and adjusting to life on Earth. Maybe having a bit of angst over everything she's lost, but taking solace in the Kent's offer of adoption. But then there's also a part of me that actually appreciates that we skip all of that and go straight to her reveling in her powers and chomping at the bit to join in Clark's superhero adventures. Because I know that's probably the initial thing that made me love her. There's something so powerful about seeing someone lose everything they've ever known and loved, be thrust into a pretty alien new way of life, and yet choose to embrace that and find joy and excitement in it. I struggled with depression and anger management a lot as a kid, feeling worthless and frustrated in my situation as a poor homeschooled kid who didn't connect with religion and didn't have anyone to talk with about the things I did connect with. But from the time I saw this episode on, I can remember regularly thinking to myself that if Supergirl could go through so much and yet still be so strong, kind, and happy, what did I really have to complain about? If I can be a little superficial for a minute, though, I do want to talk about the costume, because this is a case where Bruce Timm and his team kind of reinvented the wheel. Gone is the Silver Age dress and cape, or even the more recent Daring New Adventures jazzercise look. Instead, Supergirl's costume is more what I would call Mary Kate and Ashley chic. Sorry, I am by no means a fashion expert. It's not really something I pay attention to or think about that much. It's just that the white belly shirt, tight blue miniskirt, rolled up white gloves, a dark headband, and a red cape that's much smaller than Superman's, it's very of its time feeling for a look, and I mainly saw it represented by those twins at the time. Which is not to dog on it, it's not bad and is considered an iconic look for Kara in some circles. It's just not my cup of tea as someone who prefers the classic reds and blues. It's a little meh. Funnily enough, though, as you probably already noticed, this show affects my aesthetic sensibilities when it comes to Kara in one prominent way forever, that being how I pronounce her name. There's always been some debate over it amongst readers, with some thinking it's Kara and others going with Kara, the Arrowverse show even going out of its way in the first episode to make it clear that they were going with the former. But this was the most I heard the name said early on, and they go with the latter, at least most of the time. So I have almost always said it that way, except for a few times when I consciously tried to switch to the other one, and it just didn't sit right in my brain. And on the topic of this being the most I heard her growing up, let's talk about Nicole Tom's performance as Kara. She absolutely nails the over-eager, youthful, and a little in over her head vibe they're going for here, which makes sense because I guess Tom may have been in a similar place at the time, being in the penultimate season of a popular sitcom and considered a major up-and-coming Hollywood starlet because of it. But that's just speculation on my part. I wasn't old enough to know and remember from that time. I was literally a year old. I just know she sounds great in these episodes, and she's still the default voice I hear in my head when reading comics that feature Supergirl. Kara would next appear in the New Adventures of Batman episode Girls' Night Out, which saw her team with Batgirl to stop a crime spree by Livewire, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn, and establish her friendship with Barbara Gordon from the comics, before showing up twice more in Superman animated series' third season, stopping an alien mind virus from taking over Smallville in Unity, and helping defend Earth from a brainwashed Superman in the series finale. These are all great episodes, but I'm glossing over them here to get to the bit where I consciously start calling Supergirl one of my favorite characters and start getting molded into more of a DC fan than that of Marvel when it comes to cape and costume stories. Her appearances in Justice League Unlimited. One of the smartest moves the show makes in its first episode to demonstrate how much wider the scope is beyond the 7 League members who made up its roster during the first 2 seasons is to have Supergirl not just be there in one of the initial crowd shots, but go on the first mission with a member of the original 7, our POV character for the episode, and someone completely random feeling. It's a solid mix of the familiar with the new that allows the changes to feel both exciting and already comfortable. There's a lot I could say here to glaze JLU's pilot initiation episode, as it is a perfect episode that has everything people like about the show already going at full tilt. But for this video, I mainly want to comment that it's very impressive that after almost 4 years of not having Kara around, it feels like the team hasn't missed a beat with her, and in that same space, they managed to set up an arc for her being ready to lean more and more into being a hero, but needing the mentorship of 2 older heroes to get there, and neither of them being Superman. From here, Supergirl's arc gets deeply intertwined with the show's ongoing main Cadmus arc, which sees her discover that the secret government agency made a clone of her to use as a soldier against the League and have to fight said clone several times, ultimately being forced to kill her before she can blow up the watchtower and everyone inside of it. It was a whole thing. One thing I also realized rewatching these episodes for this video is that as much as this universe really made me care about Supergirl, it's probably also a big part of the reason I don't have much regard for Power Girl, the character her clone is based on. She gets some characterization in her episodes, but what we hear in her debut really conflicts with how she's played in the finale to me, and ultimately she's more of a vehicle for Kara to work out her insecurities and her place in the League than anything, which is a much more interesting and entertaining journey, especially with how Nicole Tom plays off of other cast members, like Jeffrey Combs as the Question and Kim Shire as Green Arrow, both of whom give incredible character-defining performances. Seriously, I don't care how many anti-union pretty boys you cast, this will always be Green Arrow to me. Supergirl's story in the Timverse concludes with JLU's final season. First in the episode Chaos at the Earth's Core, where she finally gets her proper costume. Thank you! Sorry, I didn't mean to freak out. It's just that this design is so much better and more timeless looking. You could accuse it of looking a little too much like Superman's, but that's not a bad thing in my opinion. It's simple, it's iconic, there's great color balance, and it just has this exciting and inviting vibe. Anyway, the actual plot of the episode is that Supergirl, Green Lantern, Stripe, and Stargirl, a hero in a similar position to where Kara was when she first started out, and thus is pretty jealous of her, are all teleported to the world of DC's Warlord comics. They learn they have to help Warlord and his people stop one of his villains, and Metallo and Silver Banshee, from getting a hold of a massive chunk of kryptonite that makes their way of life possible, but also strips Supergirl of her powers, which acts as a sort of final test for Kara, showing that she can still be a hero without her powers by working with the others and leaning into the warrior ways of the locals, eventually winning Stargirl over as a friend. So when we see her for the final time in Far From Home, not that one, GA and GL both tell Superman that she's now as good of a hero as she's ever going to become, but they're worried that's all she wants to become, as she doesn't seem to have much of a social life outside of the League, likely due to Earth's technology being far behind that of her childhood. It's here that Kara, John, and Ollie are teleported to the 31st century to help Brainiac 5 and Bouncing Boy free the Legion of Superheroes from a villain of their time, which also leads to Kara and Brainy falling for each other over the course of various cute scenes, and her deciding to stay with him in the future, not just because of him, but because she'll also be more than just Superman's kid cousin and be able to make a real difference in that time. Now, I must admit, as a kid, I kind of hated this episode. Thought a lot of what it said about Kara's character came out of nowhere, and that the romance with Brainiac 5 just didn't work. But having just rewatched it for the first time in a few years, I really disagree with my younger self and think a lot of those feelings came from having limited critical thinking skills at the time, starting to get really attached to the character, and beginning to explore the comics, which led to a lot of elements of different takes getting somewhat jumbled in my head. Because looking back now, I think it's in perfect line with everything we've seen so far from this version of Kara. From the jump, she was all about stepping into and surpassing Superman's boots while not really dealing with just how different her life had become. So, of course, she'd jump at the chance to live somewhere that seemed almost tailor-made for her to do just that, but also provided a somewhat inviting domestic opportunity. The little we get of her forming a relationship with Brainy also works much better with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, I think I just didn't get it because I hadn't seen much romance in the fiction I was consuming or my own life, so I found all of their little moments far too corny. But as an adult who has had some romantic experience and has now seen plenty of fiction that features or is explicitly about it, I now find their flirting really cute in the way only a cartoon from the 2000s could be. Heck, I can even trace the archetype they're playing with here of the brazen young woman who finds the nerdy guy's awkwardness charming to other things I like. They're basically the same as Sue Storm and Reed Richards, Michaela Baines and Sam Witwicky, or Ilea Schaefer and Jeremy Belpoise. And having realized that, I really do want to check out some more Legion comics sometime, because part of why I mostly avoided them all these years was my experience with this episode. And that's Supergirl in the DCAU. It's a blunt take and one with a lot of stops and starts, but there's a strong through line to the character and a great performance that makes it still entertaining to watch all these years later. Plus, of all her adaptations to other media, I think this might be the most important one. It was the first to attempt to streamline the story of the original character rather than completely reinventing her, and as such led the way for her to be reintroduced into the comics at around the same time. But both those things are stories for another day. For now, I'm going to take a break, and I'll be back in about a week to discuss yet another Supergirl adaptation with you.